9. Katie Quackenbush. One night in 2017, all hell broke loose on Nashville's famous Music Row when gunfire broke out, leaving a 54-year-old homeless man named Gerald Melton critically injured from 2 shots to the abdomen. The shooter then got into their vehicle and fled the scene. A few weeks later, police charged aspiring singer and songwriter 26-year-old Katie Lane Quackenbush with attempted murder in connection with the incident. Prosecutors accused Quackenbush of shooting Melton for asking her to move her Porsche. According to a police report, Melton was trying to sleep on a sidewalk in the early morning hours when the vehicle's exhaust fumes started to bother him. His request for Quackenbush to move allegedly sparked a shouting match that led to the violence that landed him in the hospital. The young woman's father, Jesse Quackenbush, claimed that his daughter opened fire on the victim in self-defense. He told the Tennessean that Katie and her friend were sitting in the vehicle when Melton approached and threatened to kill them. Mr. Quackenbush also accused the victim of making hateful and sexist remarks toward the women. Katie, who's now a mother of 4, has since relocated back to Texas. The case was finally resolved in 2022 when she was convicted of reckless endangerment and sentenced to less than a year of probation, avoiding jail time entirely. 8. Michelle Johnson. Early one morning in 2015, a deadly street fight broke out in Baltimore. Police saw a group of people arguing outside of a takeout restaurant and rushed over to the scene. They ordered the individuals to leave, but just minutes later, they saw the same group of people going at it once again, in the exact same location. The officers discovered 2 women suffering from multiple stab wounds, while the suspected stabber, who was later identified as 22-year-old Michelle Johnson, fled on foot. One of the victims, 36-year-old Carla Harrison, died from injuries to her abdomen. The other, a 30-year-old woman, survived with a wound to her leg. They found Johnson a little while later hiding behind a dumpster. While cuffing the young woman, the police noticed that her clothes were bloody. She told them that the blood wasn't hers, making her a prime suspect in the murder. Authorities charged Johnson with murder and various other assault and weapons-related offenses in connection with the fight. In early 2016, she pleaded guilty to the fatal stabbing and received a 35-year prison sentence plus 3 years of probation. 7. Muhammad Mujahid Hussein. Shortly after having a falling out in early 2021, 2 rival groups of friends attacked each other in a massive street brawl in Leeds, England. In an encounter that appeared to be at least somewhat planned, various members of both groups could be seen arriving at the scene on surveillance footage that was captured from nearby. The youths were armed with various weapons, including knives, sticks, and other items. At one point during the altercation, a man was hit by a car. Phone records would also later show that the incident was planned, or, in the words of Judge Jonathan Gibson, it was quite apparent that this wasn't an incident that blew up at the scene. One young man, 19-year-old Mohammed Mojahid Hussein, died from a single stab wound after being rushed to the hospital. 6 men were charged and convicted in connection with his death, and received sentences ranging from 3 to 21 months. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the violence is that it happened during Ramadan, at a time when a lot of people were out in the streets. They endangered innocent bystanders and left an emotional scar on the community. The nature of the falling out between the 2 groups remains unclear. 6. ALEXIA CAREY. In early 2019, a man in his early 20s named Jarrett Sullivan got into a disagreement on social media and decided to hash it out face-to-face. He and another man agreed to meet in front of Sullivan's home in Toledo, Ohio, to fight. 3 of Sullivan's associates came to the scene armed with guns, something court documents would later allege that Sullivan was aware of. During the altercation, a young woman named ALEXIA CAREY was shot dead. The 3 individuals who brought guns to the scene were all sentenced in 2019. One of them was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, while the other two were found guilty of lesser charges based on their claims that they didn't shoot their guns. Before Sullivan and one other defendant, 50-year-old James Siebers, could be sentenced, the COVID-19 pandemic ground the court system to a halt and delayed the case. Siebers, who was accused of firing the shot that killed CAREY, but not intentionally killing her, entered an Alford plea to involuntary manslaughter, which means that he maintained his innocence but admitted that prosecutors likely had enough evidence to secure a conviction. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Siebers claimed that he fired at least one warning shot when he saw a group that was involved in the fight encroaching on his home, and that he accidentally shot CAREY in the chest. He said that the bullets he fired were directed away from the crowd, but that one of them ricocheted and fatally struck the young woman. CAREY's grandfather was also injured by a flyaway bullet fragment. In all fairness to Siebers, he turned himself in shortly after the incident and cooperated with law enforcement. Sullivan, the final defendant to be sentenced, was originally charged with felony aggravated assault and inciting violence. He pleaded guilty to 2 lesser misdemeanor charges and was sentenced to just under a year in prison. 5. Love triangle street brawl. In a violent encounter in Merseyside, England that was captured on camera and branded by news headlines as a love triangle street brawl, 32-year-old Keith Baker approached a man named Adam Harvey and knocked him to the ground 5 times in a row. During the disturbing encounter, which took place in 2021, Baker could be seen repeatedly kicking Harvey in the head, while the person recording the incident said, "No more, mate," and encouraged him to stop while also laughing at what was going on. Baker described the brutal beating as a means of settling the victim straight, because he believed that Harvey had started seeing his girlfriend. The 90-second clip, which appears to show the victim knocked unconscious, went viral, and it had far-reaching legal consequences for Baker, who was criminally charged in connection with the brutal beating. But the victim apparently didn't want to work the situation out in court. According to the prosecutor, Joshua Sanderson Kirk, Baker turned himself in shortly after hearing that the video was sent to the Merseyside police. But Harvey declined to give a statement to law enforcement regarding the incident. During the trial, Sanderson Kirk stated that despite Harvey's lack of cooperation, Baker was clearly capable of serious and substantial violence. Baker, on the other hand, argued that the fight was made out to be something it isn't, and denied that he was the person who put the video online. When he was shown the footage, Baker allegedly said, "Jesus," and put his head in his hands in an apparent display of shame or regret. He pleaded guilty to a fray, adding another conviction to his growing list of 24 previous convictions for 46 offenses. His defense lawyer, Paul Davison, admitted that his client savagely beat the victim, but accused Harvey of seeking out Baker, implying that he more or less started the fight. Davison also pointed out that Baker's young son was at home when Harvey showed up to confront Baker. He said that the reason Baker stepped out into the street was because he thought trouble was coming no matter what, and wanted to keep the interaction away from his son. The attorney pleaded with the judge to spare his client from jail time, claiming that Baker was clearly remorseful, that he was provoked into behaving the way he did, and that he's his son's primary caretaker. The judge described the beating as difficult to watch and hard to believe that a person could treat another human in such a gratuitous way. Whatever the provocation, he sentenced Baker to 10 months in prison. 4. Joaquin Bullock. In a disturbing encounter that was captured on surveillance footage, 31-year-old Joaquin Bullock was walking down the street in Far Rockaway, Queens one day in 2018 when he got into a disagreement with a group of men. The fight soon became physical, and Bullock punched 2 of the men in the face before leaving the scene. About a half hour later, Bullock returned to the scene and grabbed 28-year-old Dion Smith by the arm and dragged him into a dark alleyway where he shot him in the chest. Acquaintances of the victim rushed him to the hospital, where he died from his injuries. More than 4 years later, in 2022, Bullock was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and criminal possession of a weapon in connection with the brutal slaying. He's scheduled for a sentencing in December of 2022 and faces up to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In a statement, Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz said that gun violence has gotten out of control in New York City and has taken too many lives. She cited the case as an example of how these types of violent crimes will never be tolerated in the borough, indicating her determination to pursue future cases to the fullest extent of the law. 3. A father's wise words. A group of teenage boys were fighting in the street in Atlantic City, New Jersey one day in 2017, while bystanders encouraged and recorded the violence. It didn't sit well with a 26-year-old father of 6 named Ibn Ali Miller. He was running an errand for his mother when he saw what was going on, and instead of turning the other cheek, he decided to make his feelings about the violence known. Miller intervened, not only physically by putting himself between 2 fighting boys, but also spiritually and verbally, by offering them some stern but wise words of advice. In a moving speech that was captured on video, he said, "You're almost men," and went on to tell the boys that they weren't going to go anywhere in life if they continued to behave the way they were. The concerned civilian told the youths to start acting like adults and condemned bystanders for encouraging the violence. Miller refused to leave the scene until the 2 boys shook hands. They finally cooperated and started to take his advice. He also spoke with some of the teens about how he could relate to their humble beginnings, because he experienced a similar upbringing. Adding some food for thought, he pointed out the kids' parents worked hard to get where they are in life. Footage of the unexpected peacemaking intervention went viral for all the right reasons, and Miller was recognized by celebrities, the city's mayor, and others for his outstanding approach to the situation. And while his decision to step in may have ended the group's entertainment for that day, this is perhaps a rare example of one street fight going wrong, but ending perfectly right. 2. Stephen Cawthorn. One day in 2017, 35-year-old Stephen Cawthorn and 39-year-old Christopher Young got entangled in a street fight with multiple men outside a home in Hull, England. Police reported to the scene after receiving reports that the men involved were hitting each other with sticks and pieces of wood. At one point, one of the participants ran into a nearby flat and came back outside with a large kitchen knife and chased after Cawthorn, who tried to flee on foot but was unable to get away before being stabbed in the back. Cawthorn tried once again to escape, but fell to the ground and was beaten with sticks as he died from his injuries. Authorities apprehended 3 men in connection with the fatal beating. 46-year-old Saeed Moisawi, who was accused of causing the wound that ultimately killed Cawthorn, was found unfit to stand trial. 45-year-old Barzan Sadoun was convicted of murder and violent disorder in 2022, 5 years after the tragedy. He's scheduled to be sentenced in late 2022. Young pleaded guilty to violent disorder. A 4th man, 34-year-old Urdi Taha, remains on the run and is wanted for murder and violent disorder. Both the tragedy and his absence have left the community and Cawthorn's family anxious and grieving while they wait for the final piece of justice to fall into place, hopefully before anyone else gets hurt or killed. 1. KASSAHUN ABEBE Edo. After leaving a friend's wedding in Washington, D.C. during the early morning hours of August 2015, 35-year-old KASSAHUN ABEBE Edo and some of his friends stopped to watch a street fight that was going on. Suddenly, a complete stranger called Edo a derogatory term. Seconds later, he punched the accountant from Texas in the face, causing him to fall to the ground, hit his head, and lose consciousness. Edo showed no signs of aggression toward the people involved in the fight. In fact, his hands were still casually in his pockets when the attacker approached him. but he paid for his curiosity over the street brawl with his life. He never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead at a hospital the next day. He left behind a wife and 2 young daughters. Police charged 27-year-old Milkias A. Baisa with second-degree murder. During his trial, prosecutors accused him of acting aggressively toward a group of young women in the street and then punching Ada without provocation. Baisa pleaded guilty to a reduced manslaughter charge in 2018 and was sentenced to 5.5 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.